All right, there we are. One second, let me set this up. All right, so welcome everyone. Before I begin the introduction, I am required by UT Austin's policies regarding student organizations to read the following disclaimer. Tonight's event is being hosted by the Polish Club at UT, a registered student organization. This is not an event sponsored by the University of Texas at Austin. The views expressed tonight are of the student organization / invited guest speaker and do not represent the views of the university or its officers. All right, with that said, I am thrilled to introduce tonight's speaker, Dr. Teresa Silverstein, who also happens to be my mother. Dr. Silverstein was born in Gliwice, Poland in 1962. She was raised in Poland and lived there until she was 33 years old. Dr. Silverstein attended Silesian Medical University and graduated in 1987. She then practiced medicine as an infectious diseases doctor for 5 years. After meeting my father, Dr. Silverstein moved to the US in 1995. Upon coming to the US, Dr. Silverstein helped found the Silverstein Law Firm, where she still serves as the Chief Operating Officer, or COO. Dr. Silverstein is also an entrepreneur, running a coffee shop in Hollywood called Honey and Bacon, after the Polish saying, miód z boczkiem. Furthermore, Dr. Silverstein is incredibly involved with the Polish community in Los Angeles. She frequently protests Polish politics in front of the Polish consulate in LA, attends local Polish speaking events, and even hosted LA's branch of the Wielka Orkiestra Świętego Pomocy at her coffee shop last year. In her free time, Dr. Silverstein enjoys watching Polish TV shows and movies, baking Polish desserts, and swimming. Most importantly, Dr. Silverstein has overcome incredible hardship in her life. She was born and raised under communist occupation. She worked tirelessly to become a doctor, despite that under communism, postmen made more money than physicians. Her father and my grandfather, Marian Grabiec, was a partisan who fought against the Nazis and then the communists for years. He later became the leader of Gliwice's branch of Solidarność, or Solidarity. On the night of the imposition of martial law in Poland on December 13, 1981, my mother had to cope with my grandfather's arrest. She did not know if she would ever see her father again. But as she will tell you, that did not stop her from taking action to try to help others. Before we start tonight's event, I would like to provide everyone with a brief roadmap of how the event will proceed. Dr. Silverstein will speak for 30 minutes about her experience living under communism, focusing especially on the night of the imposition of martial law. She will then take Q&A for 10 minutes. All right, with that said, I now welcome Dr. Silverstein.
Hi guys, I got this formal introduction. I hope you can hear me because I'm not used to Zoom. Everybody can hear me well? Nathan, good?
Yep,
okay.
I got you.
I just wanted to apologize that I might sound a little bit emotional. The events I'm going to talk about happened nearly 40 years ago. This December is going to be 40 years, and I was only 19 at the time, so I was only 1 year younger than Nathan is right now. And actually, my dad was my age. He seemed like an old man to me at the time. And these events were so intense that it's like a recording in my head. And every time it plays, it's very emotional. So if I sound emotional, I do apologize. I try to say the way it was and how I remember it. Most people, when they hear martial law, they really don't know what that means. And I didn't know what that meant either. And in Polish, it was called stan wojenny. And I first heard the words martial law or stan wojenny on a night of December 12th, actually. It was still December 12th, 15 minutes to 12 when they came to get my dad. It was Saturday night, and I was at home studying anatomy because I was already freshman in medical school. Since in Poland, you don't go to college, you go to graduate school right away after high school. So you skip that step. And my dad was sleeping, my mom was sleeping, and my brother was Also, my twin brother was on strike also at that time at the Polytechnic. He was also a freshman. And my dad was Solidarity leader. My mom worked for Solidarity. My brother was on strike. I was involved in the Independent Association of Students. So our whole family was heavily involved in Solidarity, but so was the whole country at that time. Solidarity, some people estimate, was nearly 10 million, had on nearly 10 million members. So it was a huge force that started first as simple union association fighting for workers' rights and quickly became main opposing political force that really threatened the Communist Party, and they hated what was going on. It was like the whole country at that time when it happened, it was like the whole country was on fire. There were strikes everywhere. Factories, shipyards, coal mines, students in the whole country were on strike. You might wonder what it means when students are on strike. How would you strike if you wanted to show that you are opposing certain laws? I mean, what it basically meant, nobody went to any classes, nobody participated in any activities, and the students occupied the university buildings. They were sleeping there, and often actually it seemed like fun at that time even. So I was jealous that my brother was on strike because I was freshman in medical school. I was excused from participating since medical school is considered the hardest, and in Poland you couldn't repeat the first year. We were basically forced to participate in regular classes, and we hated that because everybody else was participating in these major events in our lives. You have to remember, we grew up during communism. Nothing like this was ever happening. When Solidarity started in August 1980, it was like breath of fresh air. Suddenly everything changed. Suddenly we believed we had a voice. Suddenly there was hope, and we thought maybe we can overthrow the government. Maybe that there will be the end of communism. Somehow a miracle will happen. So all that hope was crushed that night. It was middle of the night before even martial law was imposed, because actually legally they imposed martial law at midnight and on December 13th. And so when they came to pick up my dad, they broke their own illegal law. He was sleeping, I was up. There were 3 guys that came to arrest my dad. They were all, they introduced themselves as police officers, and I really didn't know whether they were police officers because they didn't show me any IDs. They were not wearing uniforms, and they demanded to see my dad. I woke up my dad, he came to the door, and they read this strange document that part of it you can see here. And each time I read it now, it seems even more strange than it seemed at that time. It basically says that they don't like my dad's attitude, that his attitude towards the Communist Party and Soviet Union is considered to be threatening and security threat to the country during martial law. So he didn't commit any crime, and yet he was going to be arrested and put in a place of isolation, as they called it, for unlimited time. And we were not allowed to know where, why, and whether we would ever see him again. It was just horrible, because you can imagine like somebody's coming to your door at night and is taking your parents or parent away and saying that for some reason they are a threat, they're going to be taken away, And there is some weird, mysterious martial law imposed. Nobody knew what it meant and what restrictions and why. And your mind usually plays strange tricks on you. When you don't understand something, you try to dismiss it. But at the same time, I tried to understand what it meant. Martial law. I tried to ignore it, and at the same time, I couldn't. What it means. Well, my dad was very calm. I wasn't. I really lost it. I started yelling at the police officers, telling them that they're not allowed to do it, that my dad is older, he's ill. My dad remained calm. They basically ignored me, and they just told him, please dress warm and take your medications with you, because you're not going to be coming home very soon. And that was it. They took him, and my mom and I stayed at home, and we didn't know what to do. We tried to figure out what would my dad do. So I thought the only thing we can do is to warn people. We can warn people that are on strike. Maybe we can warn the people that were on call at the headquarters of Solidarity headquarters for the city. So we got dressed and we went out on the street. And it was really surreal. Middle of the night in Poland. I don't know if you guys know, that's so beautiful and peaceful. It's cold, but the whole city is covered with white snow, and it's almost like gives you this warm feeling. And yet at the same time, you see police cars and army cars passing you by, and you think that something horrible is happening, but you don't know what it is. And we are all alone, two of us on an empty street. The world for me is collapsing and everybody's sleeping. It was just so unreal. So we tried to figure out how we can warn people. The easiest thing to do would be to pick up a phone and call. But during communism, having a phone was a luxury, and we didn't have a phone at home. So the only way we could call was to go to the post office. Luckily, we lived in the middle of the city, so it was only 5 minutes walk. We walked to the post office, and I was shocked because there were 5 Polish army soldiers standing there with their guns. They pointed their guns at me, and they told me, one more step and I'll shoot you. And I'm like, what? I said, well, I'm sorry, I just want to make a call. And he said, please leave the post office or I will shoot you. And I still tried to argue and said, how can I make a call? Well, he said, I don't know. Well, he knew very well that I couldn't make a call, because what happened on that night, all the phone lines were down. You couldn't call anybody. To this day, I'm afraid to make a call. When I pick up a call, for years, I didn't realize why I have this anxiety, why I associate phone calls with something painful and miserable. So we were not able to call. We decided our only option is to walk. We walked to the headquarters, but the doors were closed. The headquarters was located on the 2nd story. We tried to yell or throw stones. Nobody heard us, so we left and we walked towards the Polytechnic, which is really a huge university in Poland. It's like 20,000 students. It occupies half of the city, and there were thousands of students on strike at that time, including my twin brother. So we walked there and asked to see the leaders. We really didn't know what was going to happen. Are they going to pacify the Polytechnic? Are they going to arrest the students? Are they going to start shooting at them? I mean, anything was a possibility. So we wanted to warn them. They definitely needed to end that strike. And the biggest danger was for the leaders of the strike, even though they were just young kids, like 22, 23. because of their position, they could have all been arrested. And what that actually meant, being arrested on that night, nobody knew. Nobody, anything was a possibility. So they all called a meeting, we gathered and tried to decide what to do. And you can put yourself in a frame of mind of a student who thought they were like fighting for a right cause, and suddenly they don't know if their whole life is ruined. Are they going to have any future? Are they going to be put in prison? For how long? Are they going to be shot? You really don't know, because there was no explanation. But at least we gave them these few hours till morning to decide what they're going to do. They were deliberating, maybe going to hiding until things are more clear, what's happening with the people that were arrested. One thing that the students did that didn't cross my mind is turn on the radio. It was such a simple thing to do. Well, it wouldn't have helped me because Polish radio was down, there was no signal. But there was a lot of students that knew English or German, and they were able to pick up signal from foreign stations. And it was just sounding so horrible. The words that were coming were like, the whole country is cut out of the world. All the borders are closed. All the lines of communications are cut. In the whole country, they are arresting all solidarity leaders. Lech Wałęsa has been put in undisclosed location. We cannot contact our press secretary or embassies. Nothing, nobody could communicate or get any information what was going on. So that was just so scary. It sounded so ominous and like, God, it was just so crushing, because not only we didn't know what tomorrow is going to hold, but our hopes that were so, for the first time we had the hopes during Solidarity, it was all crashed. And I was hoping that they cannot do this. I didn't know how many people they arrested. I knew they cannot arrest 10 million people. So I was hoping that tomorrow the whole country is going to be on strike, that we're all going to protest, that there's no way they can win. Unfortunately, I was wrong. On that night, they only arrested 10,000 people in a whole country. 10,000 people is so little in a whole country. It's nothing. And yet it was enough to crash a 10 million people union that seemed to be invincible, that already envisioned itself taking over the country. So it shows you that there is really always very few people that are willing to lead and to put their life on the line and life of their families. And it was really shocking, because 10% out of 10 million is less than 1%. It was probably like 0.1%. There were some strikes, but very little. Few coal mines and few places around the country, they were able to crash and pacify. They didn't hesitate to shoot people. And that's it, it was over. So yeah, we didn't know it that night. I stayed there with my mom the whole night till morning. In the morning, we walked back home, and that's again like that scene of us walking back home is playing in my mind, because I see these, when we're walking home, I see these people, young people walking with their skis to the bus stop. They were going skiing. And it was so shocking to me that so much had happened that night. To me, life collapsed. And they didn't even know. They were just like innocently, blissfully ignorant, walking and hoping to go skiing. And I was wondering, shall I tell them what happened? And I figured, well, they will find out soon enough. Let them have a few minutes of blissful ignorance. When I got home, we turned on TV and I saw the thing that you can probably see on YouTube, General Wojciech Jaruzelski declaring martial law and explaining a little bit what that really meant for us. Basically, that meant total suspension of all civil rights. You had no right to free speech. You had no right to gather. Solidarity was delegalized. There was no free press. We were not allowed to leave home. You were allowed to leave home, but you were not allowed to leave your city. If you wanted to go and visit your family that lived in the next town, you needed permission. There was a curfew at 8 o'clock. You couldn't leave home. When you tried to call somebody, you would hear a recording saying that your conversation is censored. Rozmowa będzie kontrolowana. It was so weird. We didn't know if anybody really controlled all the conversations, but your conversation was interrupted every few minutes with that weird recording. Later on, it became a source of jokes, but at that time, it wasn't funny at all. They closed all schools and universities for 2 weeks. And that was the most disturbing thing for me, because all of my friends were happy. Oh, 2 weeks off from school, that's wonderful. And for me, my whole world collapsed. I didn't know whether I was gonna see my dad again. I was so politically involved that the thought that all the hopes were crushed was like something I couldn't come to terms with for a while. I felt very isolated with my pain because I didn't know anybody else whose parents were put in prison that night. So you probably wonder how long it lasted. It lasted 1.5 years approximately. The martial law ended in July 1983. So it was only 1.5 years of misery. My dad was in prison for approximately 10 months. They released him earlier because he got very sick with a weird blood condition, very rare blood condition, and they couldn't handle it in a prison hospital. He spent another 6 months in a hospital, and we were afraid he was going to die because doctors couldn't figure out what caused aplastic anemia. It's usually caused by toxins. So for a while, we suspected foul play, but obviously we couldn't prove anything. After my dad came home, he told us what happened that night, what happened to him after they took him. So after they took him, they brought all the people that were arrested that night, and they put them in a Gliwice police headquarters. He was the first one that was collected. And when he was waiting for his friends to arrive, he heard the police officer explaining to him that they had to bring him in first because they believed he was the only one in the whole city that would organize strikes and would not sit still after martial law was imposed. Well, they were 100% right. Looking at what happened to other people that protested afterwards, after martial law was imposed, he would have been one of those people that would fight till the end and probably be killed. So in a way, they did him a favor. He survived. After they collected all the people, that was probably the most shocking thing for me to learn. After they collected all the people from the city, they put them in the military trucks and drove them away. They drove into the woods and stopped there. And when they were in the middle of the forest, my dad said they heard people walking around the truck and speaking Russian. He said it was very strange, but he said at that moment, they all thought of cutting, and they thought, well, that's it. They're just gonna kill us. But luckily it was just, I don't know if they did it to threaten them. We still don't know if they were really Russian soldiers helping with the operation, or they were just some kind of weird, sick joke that they played on these poor people in the middle of the night, trying to threaten them that they could die, or showing them what could have happened otherwise. Because the official story for years was that if there's that Russians were ready to intervene and crush solidarity movement, and Jaruzelski really had no choice, because it was either him or the Russians would intervene. And at that time, the 10 people that they put in prison wouldn't just be put in isolation, they would actually be killed. It's going to be 40 years since that event. It's hard to believe how that event is so like fresh in my mind, and probably forever will be. I hope I didn't bore you to death, and I hope I gave you the feeling what it was like. So next time you hear martial law, you will remember some of the stories, and it will not be just an empty word. It will mean something more, because it was an important event in Polish recent history. That's it. That's all I wanted to share with you. Anybody has any questions?
Yeah, if I could just break in here and say, Mom, thank you. That was really incredible. I've heard this story before, but every time I learn something new, like this time, I never heard that you guys suspected foul play regarding like potential poisoning. But that was really intense. I mean, what a story. So yeah, thank you. Yeah, now we're opening up the floor to questions. So please, everybody go ahead.
I'm just curious what your father's name was.
Good question. My dad's name was Marian Grabiec. Yeah. He was 59 at that time. Somehow people aged faster, I think, at that time, because medical care wasn't that great, and he survived the war, basically spending entire 6 years in the woods as a partisan, and then fighting the communists for 2 years after the war ended, and was always in opposition to the government. I think it took a huge toll on his health. He definitely had PTSD, but he would never hesitate, he would never hesitate to fight. That's something that I admired and hated sometimes, because between what's right and the family, he would always choose, like, if I have to fight, I will fight no matter what. And we just wanted to be put first. But my dad believed that you fight for what's right, and everything else has to wait its turn, that there's priorities, that justice is more important, and freedom is more important than anything. And life, he hated the life we had during communism, that basically you didn't matter. And what they did during martial law, they took the little rights we had. You guys can not probably even imagine what it is like, have no freedom at all, and basically they can take you away for no reason, put you in prison however long they want, and they actually can kill you, because they killed people. And it was probably 20 years later that some of the people were prosecuted for what happened, and obviously not all of them. When the government changed, it was almost too late to find all the people responsible for what happened that night. And the biggest question is whether Jaruzelski was right, whether that was the lesser evil. Nobody will ever know whether the Russians were really ready to intervene. Or alternatively, they believed that the Russians were ready to intervene. And that's how I see it. That nobody knows whether they were prepared for a military intervention, which wouldn't have been so difficult since they actually had their troops in Poland. Or Jaruzelski was convinced that that's what they're going to do. But I will always believe that Jaruzelski honestly believed that there was a real danger. And actually, that's what my dad believed too, when we discussed the situation later on. He did believe that solidarity was moving too fast, that a year and a half wasn't enough for them to accept that they can actually lose power, that the demands were too aggressive, that we needed to slow down. And actually, one thing I forgot to tell you guys is that he warned me that something like this will happen. Approximately a month prior to this event, my dad told me, don't be afraid, but in the near future, they will come and get me. And I said, what do you mean come and get you? It's all so great. Look, it's freedom. We're finally winning. You know, maybe it's going to be the end of communism. And he said, no. The communists are still too strong. Solidarity leaders don't understand that they are pushing too fast. We need to take at least one step back. They will not allow that. So be prepared. They will come and get me soon. And he was right. So when they actually came to pick him up and arrest him, that thought that actually he predicted it allowed me to keep calm. If whatever that happened wasn't really calm, but allowed me to remain sane. It's almost like as if he knew what was happened, so he could predict it. It was like a chess game. He knew that they had no other way. They had to react that way. And he was prepared for it. I'm sure he played that scenario in his mind and figured out how he's going to react. He didn't resist. He just went. I think he thought that it would be safer for us if he doesn't. And it was very peaceful. Some other people didn't want to let them in, so they broke the doors, used violence. We were saved all of that. Ultimately, my dad thought that there really was no point in resisting. And he believed probably that it was the safest for his family if he just goes with his own free will. One thing that we often thought was what was in his file. You know, all of the leaders during communism had their files. They collected the information. We were trying to figure out who in the thought was constantly bothering us. Who in our circle of friends was the one that was informing about my dad? They must have gathered the information somehow, but we were never able to get that information. We requested his file, but it was so sanitized, there was nothing there. I can't believe that all they had is some official document about that he exists, but nothing. There must have been humongous amount of information, but they really destroyed all the documents. So we will never know who informed on him, how they gathered all the information. And maybe it's better that way. Some things may be better not to know, because what would we do with this information? So after all of these intense stories, I think we've had enough for tonight.
Yeah, if you could just take a few more questions, Mom, if you
I can take questions if you guys have any.
Yeah, so anybody questions?
Did your father live to see the liberation of the country and the transition to democracy? And what did he think about it? How did that make you feel?
That's such a good question. Yeah, my dad did. He lived, and he saw the liberation of the country. Unfortunately, some of his predictions didn't come true. He was hoping that the liberation would mean more social justice. What happened after Poland regained freedom, it was a really wild form of capitalism when there was very little protection. People were losing jobs. Some people were being thrown out of their apartments, and he hated it. He didn't like that. It's almost like a revolution. There's this saying that revolution eats its own children. The people that workers, the people that were fighting often were left without any means to support themselves in this new wild form of capitalism. Poland was very poor after the end of communism. So the new government tried to do the best it can, but it was a very hard situation. And when I say my dad, some of the predictions didn't come true. I remember during communism, years before that night, I asked my dad, so Dad, if one day communism collapses, how are we gonna change the system? How do you go through all of this centrally governed system to privately own? How is that even possible? Where are we gonna get the money? And my dad said, oh, don't you worry. If that would ever going to happen, America would help Poland the same way they helped Germany after the war. I'm sure there would be a similar plan, like Plan Marshall after the war that helped Germany recover. Well, that never happened. We were left alone again, and that was a very tough situation for so many people, young people and people with a lot of entrepreneurial spirit were able to do great, but so many people were even poorer than before, because during communism it was really, people had no money, but everybody had a job and you always were guaranteed certain minimum standard, and suddenly even that security net was taken away. And my dad didn't like it. He felt disappointed. He almost felt like, yeah, I mean, we had to fight. Communism was evil, but that is not right. The feeling of justice was not fulfilled. Very good question.
I wanted to know what school was like after you went back, after the 2-week break ended.
What school was like? Yeah. For me, it was awful. I don't know how I graduated, how I was able to go to classes. It seemed like normal, but everybody was so sad and it wasn't the same. Somehow everything changed, and it was really hard to point your finger what it was. But people were more aware of the limitation of everyday life. Most medical students are so goal-oriented that they try to block that information. And they're so competitive, they try to focus on studying. For me, it was really hard. Sitting there looking at everybody just like trying to cram for tests, and I was just like, God, does it even matter? I was really feeling extremely disconnected from that. And I remember studying histology while going to visit my dad in prison. God, such a strange memory. I couldn't focus, so I started drawing things because that was the only way to force me to focus on what I was studying, because my brain was not there. To see your dad in prison who has done nothing wrong, and they kept them in the same prison as they kept regular like criminals, standing in line to visit him with people that were visiting murderers and thieves, and it's just so gross. They did treat them a little bit better, I think. The prison guards knew that these people were different and tried to give them more respect. But I think that one of the worst parts about martial law was the lack of predictability. Nobody knew how long it's going to last. Nobody knew how and if it's ever going to end. Maybe it would progress to something worse. Maybe they would turn Poland to something like Russia. The lack of predictability, not only lack of hope, but just nobody knew. They never told us, oh, we're gonna only do the martial law for 1.5 years. Once we pacify everybody and Russia becomes a little weaker, we'll let you guys play again. Nobody knew what it was gonna be like and how long and what future it would bring. So what was the point of even studying, It was just so strange, so surreal. I don't really wish anybody ever experienced something like this, because for a young person, for anybody really, but for me personally, it was probably single worst event in my life, I think. Probably nothing comparable ever happened. One night, everything ends. All the hopes, and there's no future. And you don't know if you're ever gonna see your dad again, because it was months until we heard from my dad. And when they took my dad away, I asked them one logical question. I asked, so how do we find out where you're taking him? And they said, well, we don't know, but tomorrow you can call the number and they will tell you where we keep your dad. Well, we called, obviously, nobody picked up. And then we had to go there in person. They had no information, or they were not willing to disclose it. First time we heard from him was like 3 or 4 months later, when we received a letter from him that was censored. And it was a stamp on it, censored. And there were parts of it that were redacted, and he was saying he was doing fine, but with huge chunks of it redacted, we didn't know how he was doing. It was really frightening. And when we saw him in prison, he didn't seem like he was himself. Well, maybe because he was already ill, but maybe that stress of that environment and of the whole situation was taking a toll on him.
All right.
It's a long answer to your question.
Yeah. We have about 2 minutes left, or really about 1 minute, so probably have time for one quick last question if anybody has. No? All right. I guess I have one last question, which is, we're in an interesting time right now where before COVID, I don't think anyone could even begin to understand martial law. But interestingly, now that so many of us have been, under lockdown and stuck at home and in quarantine, I think we sort of, have at least like a fraction of the understanding necessary to know what you went through. So could you talk about what you think are some of the similarities and differences between martial law in Poland and the COVID lockdown?
Well, there's so many differences. I mean, the only similarity is the threat and lack of predictability, because COVID is a worldwide phenomenon. Poland was isolated in its pain, and we always were aware that nobody understands or cares. Like, years later, I learned from your dad, Nathan, how people were making jokes on American TV about martial law in Poland. So that feeling of isolation, and that was different. With COVID, there was always a plan of action. We always knew that the way out of it is through a vaccine, and we just need to survive a year or whatever long. I mean, there was also other forms of possible treatment, and so there were tools. We had tools, even though they would take time to develop. We did have tools to deal with it. But during martial law, there were no tools. We didn't know what to do. We basically couldn't do anything. We were at total mercy of the government, of the, not even government, of Wojskowa Rada Ocalenia Narodowego. That's what it was called, a military council of national salvation. That's how the military unit called itself, that took over. So there was no rules. Here we still have some level of control. You know what to do not to get sick. I mean, sometimes it might be hard to do, but you're instructed to stay at home, wear a mask, wash your hands, get vaccine. There is a roadmap out of it. And actually lockdown is for your protection. Whereas during martial law, lockdown is a form of imprisonment. So basically that's what it is. you're convinced that you are being asked to stay at home for your own good. Whereas for us, it was you were asked to stay at home because you have no rights and you mean nothing, and we can do whatever we want with you. Yeah, I think that's what it is. I mean, yeah, you can imagine what it is when, I think the biggest similarity is you can for the first time imagine how life can change so quickly in a matter of days or months, how life, the way you knew it, suddenly becomes completely different. I think that's the biggest similarity. But and we're not isolated at all. We know that the whole world is going through it, that you have so many people working on getting out of scientists all over the world. We were alone. And if Jaruzelski wanted to keep us under this occupation for another 10 years, that's probably the way it would be. We couldn't do anything. Nobody had guns. And people were not willing to fight. And that's probably the saddest lesson I learned, that in every group, you only have very few people that are actually willing to do something. You have a lot of people that will join, but when it gets tough, very few people are willing to keep on going. And I always pray that if I ever am in a situation like my dad, that I would have the strength to do what's right. Because there's so many excuses that come to your mind. Oh, I mean, maybe not today, maybe tomorrow. Oh, maybe he can do it. Why me? We all make up these excuses. And that's nothing to be ashamed of. It's our human instinct, survival instinct that tries to protect us, but to be able to bypass it and to create a roadmap for yourself that is just, that is motivated by justice and what you believe is right, without all of the side noise that's telling you, no, stay safe. It's really, really hard. I don't think I was ever tested to that degree that my dad was several times in his life. I really hope I never will, but if I do, I'd like to be able to say, I did what my dad would do.
Yeah, I think that's a great note to leave things on. Thank you so much, Mom. I think I speak on behalf of everyone when I say that was really incredible and moving, and we appreciate you sharing a really painful, moment in your life with us. So thank you.
Thank you guys for listening. How do I disconnect?
I'll take care of that. All right, everybody. Thank you so much. I'll see you next Wednesday. Bye.
Dziękuję bardzo. Do widzenia.
Do widzenia. Dziękuję bardzo. Pozdrawiam wszystkich.
Do widzenia, dziękujemy.
Do widzenia. Do widzenia.
Do widzenia, dziękuję.